Everyone is wondering what is going on with Sean Diddy Combs. And normally this is not the kind of thing that I talk about, but the federal investigation into him is so serious. And I keep hearing people speculate about what they think is going on. So I want to provide you with what has occurred from a lawyer's perspective. This is going to be a longer video, but I want to take the time to really break this down and talk about what's going on and just how serious this is. In March, federal authorities executed search warrants at Sean Diddy Combs' homes in Los Angeles and in Miami. The search was conducted by federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security. This is really important because the Department of Homeland Security agents, they investigate allegations of sex trafficking. The search came after Diddy had received some negative attention from the allegations that his former partner Cassie made against him in a 2023 lawsuit, where she alleged that she had been abused by him for years. Diddy settled that lawsuit out of court last year. Other lawsuits with similar allegations have since been filed against him. I want to be clear. Sean Combs has not been charged with anything, and like anybody else, he is innocent until proven guilty. And I'm not giving any opinions about whether or not he's guilty of anything, but I do think that what's going on with him legally provides the opportunity for me to break down all of the legal aspects of what is happening, because people have all kinds of thoughts about what they claim is happening and what certain things mean, and most of these people are wrong and have no clue what they're talking about. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break down from a lawyer's perspective what is actually happening. Before I break down what the difference is between the state and the federal criminal investigation, I want to be sure that you understand who the parties are and what their roles are. So first, there's Sean Combs, who is under federal investigation. There's the Department of Homeland Security, which is a federal law enforcement agency that investigates crimes like sex trafficking. There's the United States Department of Justice, which prosecutes cases on behalf of the federal government. Then there's the United States Attorney's Office. Now, the U.S. Attorney's Office is a division of the Justice Department. It's the prosecutorial wing of the Justice Department. There are 93 U.S. Attorney's offices around the entire United States. Each is headed by a single U.S. attorney that is appointed by the president. Sean Combs is being investigated by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. This particular U.S. Attorney's Office has prosecuted some very high-profile cases. It helped to dismantle organized crime and the mob in the 1980s and the 1990s. It has prosecuted those who were responsible for attacking the U.S. homeland. It also sent Martha Stewart to prison. They deal with really big financial crime cases. This is a very powerful U.S. Attorney's Office and one you do not want to find yourself being investigated by. A federal criminal investigation is not like a criminal investigation at the county or local level. Here's what I mean by that. When you call the local police to report a crime, if they find probable cause, they'll make an arrest and they'll present the case to the state's attorney or the district attorney, depending on what state you live in and what they call your prosecutor. That case will then be prosecuted in state court. The police really don't have a choice in the kinds of crimes that they investigate. This is not the case with the federal government and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The federal government has the luxury of not having to investigate local crimes and responding to 911 calls. That means that federal law enforcement and federal prosecutors can be selective in the cases they take. They tend to take cases that they know that they can win. Federal prosecutors have a 98% conviction rate. Only about 2% of those charged by the federal government actually go to trial. 98% of those charged by the federal government plead guilty. This is because federal agents and federal prosecutors are aggressively investigating their cases to make sure that they have all the evidence they need to convict you before you're even charged. If you're being prosecuted by the federal government, rest assured that the federal agents and the prosecutors know exactly what you did, how you did it, who you did it with, and they likely have people already lined up to testify against you. They build rock solid cases. It is rare that you will beat the federal government if you're prosecuted by them. The federal government prosecutes violations of federal law, not state and local law. They prosecute laws that were passed by the United States Congress and signed by the president, not by state governments. So what does that mean for Sean Combs? It means that the Justice Department is not investigating him because they think that they might find something. It means that the federal prosecutors believe that they have sufficient evidence that leads them to believe that they can prosecute Mr. Combs for federal crimes. It means that federal agents and federal prosecutors have already identified what they believe to be violations of federal law by Mr. Combs. In this case, it might be weapons violations or narcotics violations or trafficking violations. It could be tax evasion. We really don't know. But what we do know is that there was enough to get a warrant to search his homes, which I'm going to talk about next. Federal agents executed a search warrant on 2 of Mr. Combs' properties. First, let me talk about what a search warrant is, and then I'll break down how authorities obtained one and why this is so serious for Mr. Combs. So, the Constitution guarantees citizens the right to be free from unreasonable searches and unreasonable seizures. That means that the government and law enforcement cannot take your possessions. They cannot come into your home or search your property without lawful authority. This is stated in the 4th Amendment. The police can search your home only if they have a warrant or if there's an exception to the warrant clause. I'm not going to get into the warrant clause exceptions right now because we'd be here too long if I did. For purposes of this video, I'm only going to talk about what is required to get a search warrant. A search warrant is a legal document that is signed by a judge allowing law enforcement to search someone's property. But search warrants are not issued just because law enforcement asks for one. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution spells out what is required in order to get a warrant. The Fourth Amendment says that a warrant can only be issued when law enforcement can provide probable cause and they must swear under oath that what they're looking for is where they're telling the judge it's going to be found. To break that down, this means that law enforcement must have sufficient evidence to believe that what they're seeking is in the place that they want to search. It can't be a hunch or I think it might be there. They need concrete evidence to provide to the judge and swear to this under oath that what they're saying is true. Otherwise, the judge will not sign the warrant. So what does that mean for Sean Combs? It means that before federal agents executed the warrant on his properties, they conducted an investigation that made them believe that they would find incriminating evidence at his properties. It means that they knew what incriminating evidence was there before they arrived and that someone told them it was there. So, who would have told them, you ask? Well, witnesses that the federal agents have already been working with. Federal agents went to a U.S. federal court magistrate judge and presented what is called an affidavit to the judge, laying out their investigation, laying out their witnesses, and what they learned. This affidavit would have also laid out the incriminating evidence that the agents were looking for and why they believed it was present at Mr. Combs' home. The federal magistrate judge would have looked through the warrant affidavit and had an opportunity to question the federal agents. The federal magistrate judge is only allowed to sign the warrant if the agents are able to show that they have probable cause to believe that the evidence would be found in Mr. Combs' homes. Why am I telling you this? This means that the warrant used to search Diddy's home was signed by a federal judge and was supported by probable cause. Now, for those of you who would say, well, law enforcement lie all the time to get warrants, I'm not disagreeing with you, but this is not some low-level narcotics case where the police are trying to find a dime bag at some dealer's grandmother's home. This is the federal government and federal agents we're talking about. Federal judges do not issue warrants without probable cause. Also, how a warrant was obtained is crucial for any criminal prosecution. If agents lied to the federal judge to get the warrant to search Diddy's homes, it could call into question any future prosecution. Diddy's attorneys could challenge the issuance of that warrant and any evidence it yielded. What is known as a Franks hearing will have to be held to determine if the warrant was lawfully obtained and whether any evidence should be suppressed. This hearing was established from a 1978 case called Franks v. Delaware before the U.S. Supreme Court. Also, law enforcement can be sued for unlawfully procuring a search warrant if it were determined that they lied to get the judge to issue that warrant. So, you can rest assured that there was sufficient evidence contained in the affidavit to search Sean Combs' homes such that a federal judge believed that the government had made a showing that criminal activity had occurred and that incriminating evidence would be found at Diddy's homes. So once the agents have the warrant signed by the federal judge, they can then go and execute that warrant. The warrant will lay out the places that they can search. Warrants have to be specific. If the police believe that incriminating evidence is in the home, the warrant will say that they can search the home. Warrants have to spell out where law enforcement are allowed to search. Otherwise, evidence obtained can be challenged later on in court. So, with the warrant to search Diddy's properties, federal authorities coordinated with law enforcement in 2 states to ensure that they had the element of surprise. They don't tell you that they're going to come and search your home. They just show up. Once they got to Diddy's homes, they went looking for what they suspected was already there. And we know from news reports that federal authorities and agents seized some items from Diddy's homes. This would suggest that some of the things that they went looking for, they actually found them. Diddy's legal team would have been given a list of the items that were seized from his home. So Diddy knows exactly what the agents took. One question that has come up is, why were Diddy's sons handcuffed during the search of his property? Well, this is normal procedure. It is something that law enforcement does for what is called officer safety to ensure that no one interferes with the search, mainly because things can escalate so quickly. It doesn't mean that they were under investigation. They were just temporarily detained, and the law says that federal agents can do that. A detention will be deemed reasonable under the Fourth Amendment as long as it lasts no longer than necessary to accomplish the government's lawful purpose. In this case, that purpose would have been the execution of the search warrant. Another question and what has caused a lot of speculation is why the government came with such force. Well, this is how the federal government and its agents execute search warrants. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're accused of, there will always be a tremendous show of force when they're executing a warrant. Sean Combs likely did not know that the federal government was coming to search his home. It's possible that he knew that the feds were investigating him. And why do I say that? Well, in order for the federal government to get a warrant and build their case against you, witnesses have to be questioned and documents might be subpoenaed. And it's possible that people around Diddy had already talked to the federal agents about their investigation, and it would not be unlikely that this information would make it back to Diddy. Now, there are also times when you have no idea that the feds are looking into you, so he actually may not have known at all. Before I talk about what possible charges he might be facing, let me talk about what happens in the federal criminal investigation for you. So, in the investigation phase, federal agents and federal prosecutors begin to gather evidence to determine if a federal crime has been committed. The federal government is looking at everything and everyone. During this phase, the government puts you into one of three categories: witness, subject, or target. A witness is someone who has knowledge. They just know about what's going on. Maybe they knew something that could help the government's investigation. They may not have done anything wrong at all. Whereas a subject is someone who has done something that might bring them into the scope of the investigation, meaning you are someone that the government is looking at for possible prosecution. A target is someone who the government has zeroed in on for prosecution. You are the person they are looking for to prosecute and send to prison. The grand jury has already heard and gathered enough evidence to issue an indictment against you. The government has already linked you to the crime they want to prosecute you for. A target is about as close as you're going to get to being prosecuted. Diddy's attorneys want to know which one is he. Is he a witness? Is he a subject or a target? Everyone in this circle also wants to know which category do they fall into. A target means the indictment is going to say the United States of America versus you. And a good attorney needs to know which one their client is because that attorney must know the exposure their client has, meaning is it beneficial or is it dangerous for you to talk to the government? And if you're a target, you might need to invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. Whereas if you're a witness, that might not be much of an issue for you and your attorney. That brings us to what everyone is talking about. What criminal charges is Diddy facing? The truth is, we don't know. Only he knows what he did and did not do. And only the federal government knows what it's investigating him for. There are hundreds of federal criminal laws for which he could be prosecuted for. Narcotics and trafficking and weapons violations have been some of the things that Diddy is speculated to be under investigation for. Some people say, aren't those state law crimes? Well, yes and no. If you transport an individual across state lines for prostitution, illegal or illicit purposes, that could be a violation of the Mann Act of 1910. So what does that mean? It means that you could be in violation of a federal law if you are paying someone for sex and you have them travel across state lines to accomplish that purpose. Meaning that if you fly someone from New York to Los Angeles for paid sex, that could be a violation of the Mann Act. The same goes for weapons violations. If you are legally allowed to carry a weapon or own a weapon in one state, it does not mean that you can lawfully do so in another state. Also, you cannot lie on federal forms or have others lie on federal forms for you to obtain weapons. This is the kind of conduct that puts you right in the crosshairs of the federal government for prosecution. The reach of the federal government is long, and you do not want to find yourself in its clutches. Before we talk about sentencing in the federal system, it's important to say that Sean Combs has not been charged or convicted of any crime. So we can't say what amount of prison time he's facing because at this point, he's not facing any. However, I will tell you that if it were to ever get to that point, the federal sentencing guidelines will be looked at to determine whether or not he will be sentenced to prison. The federal guidelines are like a rule book created by Congress that judges use to consult whether someone should be sentenced to prison. The guidelines take into consideration many factors to come up with a score. That score and the charge determine what sentence a person should be given. Federal investigations and federal prosecutions are very serious. I broke all of this down for you for one sole purpose, to highlight the importance of staying out of the crosshairs of the criminal justice system. And if you find yourself in the unfortunate position of being under a federal investigation or a federal prosecution, get an experienced attorney that handles federal criminal cases. You can't just get someone that helped you out on a weapons case on the state level. You need someone who practices in federal court and has dealt with the federal government in a criminal case. Not someone your cousin or a family member told you about or a lawyer that helped you out on a car accident case. Get someone who knows what they are doing. Hey, listen, I hope this video has been informative to you. I want to know what you think about it, and if you learned anything, drop me a comment down below and let me know what you think.